right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of ObscuraCast. It's been a hot minute since we've done an episode, so I appreciate you guys that have stuck with us. I know that we're sort of making the rounds as far as being like global as far as our audience is concerned, so depending on where you guys are listening, I hope you guys have enjoyed the show up until this point, and we're going to get into another episode tonight, and as always, Dan O'Neill is with me as my co-host. How you doing this evening, sir?
Doing good, man. Doing good. It feels good to be back. Had a little break. Life got hectic and crazy, but we're back to it.
I also want to remind you guys that we are live on Spotify as well as Apple Music. Also, we have handles on both X.com and Instagram. So at ObscuraCast, same name as the podcast itself. You guys should be able to find us. We'll start posting more stuff. Like I said, we've been in sort of a hiatus for a little while. Not crazy long, but longer than we'd like. So tonight we're going to get into an interesting topic. We've done a couple paranormal episodes. And we're sort of getting into another one tonight and a little bit more of a obscure topic like we usually do on the show. Tonight we're getting to the Ohio State Reformatory that's not too far from us in Mansfield. We both live in Cleveland, as you guys probably know if you listen to any of the other episodes, but not far from us and pretty, I would say, pretty notable prison and also paranormal activity sort of epicenter in the Ohio State Reformatory. Dan, you got any thoughts on that? Sort of how we're going to get into the episode, what you're interested in talking about?
Well, I mean, it's cool because you got like the historical aspect of it. Then you got the cool like entertainment film aspect because that's where they shot Shawshank Redemption, great movie. So you got like the historical film aspect, but then we also have the paranormal aspect, which also ties into history. So this is kind of like a 3-for-1 deal here. So I'm excited for it. It's exciting. It's something that we've learned, when you're young, growing up in Ohio, you always hear about it and how it's haunted and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, if you've ever seen or if you guys want to look it up, like I said, it's the Ohio State Reformatory. It's in Mansfield, Ohio. At the bird's eye view of this place, you would think it's actually a pretty cool place. And then you understand that a lot of stuff has happened within that place that was not very kosher, as some would say. There's been a lot of deaths, a lot of brutality, a lot of alleged hauntings going on. Like Dan said, obviously alluding to the Shawshank Redemption, has become more of a tourist attraction these days. It's a very reputable place to go ghost hunting and all that kind of stuff. It sort of has its own allure these days, where before it was just a reformatory school and then turned into a prison itself. And then all of this stuff happened, and we'll get into all that as the episode goes on. But I think it's an interesting topic because it's so multifaceted. I think that's probably the coolest thing about this topic is that we're going to get into a lot of different stuff as the episode goes on.
For sure.
So
they also have had heavy metal concerts there. Like I think Slipknot's performed there.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
Fest there. Yeah, it's crazy.
But we'll get into a little bit of the history, sort of how it started and the way that the correctional institution sort of wanted things to go, and then sort of how it sort of went off kilter and sort of went the opposite way of what they were thinking was going to happen and all that kind of stuff. So we'll set the scene sort of from that premise. So the actual prison itself as a reformatory school was built in 1886. Like I said, it was designed to be a real rehabilitation prison. It wasn't necessarily meant for punishment. It wasn't essentially a correctional facility in a sense that like correctional facilities are seen now as more of a reform school or a reform prison. It was the architecture itself, like the actual build of the prison itself, was inspired by European castles and churches, and it was intended for first-time offenders and youth reform. So like I said, it was a reform school or a reform prison first and foremost. That's what the quote-unquote dream was for the prison when it started out, and then all of this stuff started to happen. But there was a lot of optimism with this place from the research that Dan and I did before the episode started. It was seen as a place to sort of correct yourself and then go back out into society. And it sort of took a turn for the worst as we sort of, like I said, we're going to talk about it more as we get through the episode. But there was a lot of education that was supposed to be within this prison or this reform school or reform prison, whatever you want to call it. There was like a discipline model where like sort of things were sort of going to go how they were. You were either good or bad at the prison, and that would sort of define the outcome of what was going to happen to you during your stay there. And then the idea of fixing criminals was also a huge thing, like I said, the research that Dan and I did. It was a reform school. It was somewhere where you went to sort of right the ship and then get back out in the ocean, so to speak. So Dan started from that premise. Do you sort of see value in how it sort of started and then it sort of went off track depending on who was sort of involved, or how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, from what we read and everything, it seems like, it was built in 1886.
So obviously different time from when all this stuff started to happen, like we'll allude to. So
Yeah, and the construction took like almost a decade. The first group was 150 inmates, and they stayed in the west wing of the reformatory. That was in 1896. Then they finished the construction of the east wing after that, and various buildings until 1919. So it saw a couple decades worth of building. There was, like you said, a lot of optimism, and early on, they did really well. Um, they did really, really well as far as the rehabilitation. I remember reading where the builder, he was from Cleveland, Ohio. That builder wanted to create a building that was like opulent and like a castle and not like just like this prison, this square block of, he wanted to show like hope, so inspiration, not tear them down. And you can definitely see that in the design and the architecture, the attention to detail that that guy has, just really, really stands out. Um, as far as fixing the criminals, a lot of them were youth. And I personally, this one also hits home for me too, because I worked for a brief time at a placement school, essentially a reform school for troubled youth. And, not gonna reach all of them, but there are kids, some kids just get dealt a really shitty hand in life, and it's not their fault. Um, I think every kid deserves a chance and an opportunity at, redemption and getting a fresh start, but they obviously, like, they gotta want to too. You can try to force somebody to do it, and unless they really truly wanna change and right the ship, it's not gonna happen if they don't want to, but, I think it was good when it started off. The original architect was Levi Schofield, and he was from Cleveland, Ohio, like I said. He used Victorian Gothic and Richardsonian Romanesque and Queen Anne were his styles for the exterior of the building, and it's a brick and concrete design, almost like Romanesque. So yeah.
So we sort of so we sort of gave the scope of sort of how everything started and sort of the optimistic view that they had going into things. Where things get sort of dicey and sort of get interesting is sort of what happens, a couple decades later, sort of into, I think with the documentaries and sort of the research we did, sort of into the 50s and 60s is where sort of things get dicey and sort of start to take a turn for the worst. So as much as they were optimistic about the way this thing was going, it seemed like there was like external forces or possibly internal forces, depending on what side of the fence you sit on, which one had more way or more sway or more skin in the game as far as that's concerned. So the overcrowding thing was obviously became a huge issue. Dan, I don't know if you want to sort of allude to the fire and all that stuff that took place, sort of give us some context on why the overcrowding took place in the first place, and then the shift from reform to punishment and all that kind of stuff. So sort of give us some context
Yeah.
on that whole ordeal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like I said before, it was a success. The rehabilitation, they saw a lot of success with the rehabilitation efforts from this place. That all changed after a catastrophic event. That was in 1930. There was a huge fire at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus, where 320 inmates perished. Hundreds more had to be relocated to nearby prisons. So suddenly, the nonviolent offenders uh, at the State Reformatory, they ended up being side to side with hardened criminals. So they went from 100 and I think it was like 150 prisoners, and that number quickly went up. I'm trying to find the exact number that I can give
So basically,
everybody.
you're shoulder to shoulder with
Oh yeah,
people that are trying to correct their lives versus lifers, rapists, murderers. And we're
yeah. So
not
there,
talking about like a 5-year bid. We're talking about guys that are serving like life in prison for violent offenses.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was prisoners being beat and killed by other prisoners on a regular basis. Several notorious criminals were there. Frank Freshwaters was sent to prison for the 1957 murder for another man. Freshwaters' behavior was so stellar that he was transferred to work at an honor farm where he quickly escaped. Freshwaters evaded capture until 2015 when he was in his 80s. How'd you like to be that guy? That's crazy. By the way, I'm getting this information off of usghostadventures.com, so shout out to US Ghost Adventures. In the 1920s and 1930s, inmates Philip Orlick, Merrill Chandler, and Chester Probasky all murdered prison guards. Chandler
Yeah,
and
I
Probasky.
heard that the documentary that I watched, I heard about a couple of these. There was also like I think it was a warden and his family or something like that, or maybe a guard and his family was taken like hostage by two
Superintendent.
guys, Daniels and I can't remember the last name of the other guy.
Yeah, so it was in 1948. John West and Robert Daniels were the
Yeah, John
inmates.
West and Robert Daniels, that's who it was. Yep.
Yeah, they kidnapped the superintendent of the prison's honor farm along with his wife and daughter. The two men murdered the entire family in a cornfield and went on to commit several more murders. West was subsequently shot to death by police, and Daniels was sent to the electric chair.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's what I saw as
Yeah.
well. Yep.
And there's a lot more dark and ominous events. Those are just kind of more notorious ones. But I mean, people died all the time at this place. It went from a place of hope to a quote unquote shithole very quickly.
Yeah, we're talking about, I mean, when we're talking about conditions too, like people are obviously, I think we would, correct me if I'm wrong, we could probably both agree that people are products of their environment. So if you're put in an
Mhm.
environment with harsh conditions, you're going to become a harsh human being. It's just the way things go, unfortunately. But if we're talking about conditions, we're talking about like some seriously brutal discipline methods. Like people were, like you said, were beat, cut, whatever, solitary confinement horrors. So like people were locked away with literally no like reality to the outside world. They were confined to like probably like a 3x3 or like a 4x4 cell and in complete darkness and things like that. There was the disease aspect, malnutrition. I think I also saw that like in the documentary that I did or that I watched, there were sometimes 3 people to a cell or 4 people to a cell in this place. Like, and we're talking about maybe a 10x10 or like a 9x9 cell, maybe 3, 4 steps wide if you're striding, if that.
Yeah, not nothing. You
Like
also had electro torture, by the
yeah, like
way.
you said, there was also like the violence between the inmates. People were getting beat, people were getting stabbed, people were getting beat up, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, like you had to sort of become like battle hardened, I guess, in a way, if you were in this place. It sort of became a fend for yourself, survival of the fittest type scenario. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that like contributed was 1960, the conditions got way worse because the state defunded the reformatory model when they turned it into a maximum security prison. So there were even more killings among inmates and guards.
Because they didn't
It's when
have the
you had
money
like
to
your
like fund
they didn't.
guards and pay guards and like all the
Yep.
security and all that kind of stuff. Everything sort of went into sort of descent.
Yeah, and then there was also another thing, if you weren't beat to death by a prisoner or a guard or tortured or anything, you also had to worry about rat infestation. So there was disease that you also had to worry about as well. So, like, really bad. I know the maximum amount of people that there were. Now, everyone remember, okay, when this was first built, there were 100 cells, there was 150 prisoners, okay? So think about that. At its
So we're talking
height,
about what I would expect from a reformatory or a prison or correctional facility. We're talking 2 people to a cell,
small yes, you want
more or
small
less.
numbers, yes. Some people probably had multiple people probably had cells to themselves.
Well, solitaire.
A
So we're
lot of
talking
them,
about
yeah,
50 extra that probably had just cells to themselves.
yeah, yeah. So, 1978 by 1978, there were 2,200 men crammed into that prison. Think about that.
Do you have the square footage of the prison? Can you look that up real quick? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, yeah, I
How
can
much
look
the
that
square
up.
footage is depending on like if we're talking about a 9x9 cell, I wonder if we could do that conversion. I wonder what that would be like if we're talking
Yeah,
about 2000 plus, what the square
we can
footage of the
do
place was,
yeah,
and then space for people to sort of like because you're gonna have space for the mess hall, you're gonna have space for like yard, you're gonna have space for all that kind of stuff. So like people thinking like the square footage is all encompassing of the prison and the living conditions, you have to factor in the yard, you have to factor in solitary confinement for people that aren't in gen pop, you have to all that kind of stuff comes into play. Where if you're thinking about a prison as just a living quarters and there's nothing else going on, once you shrink that down to living quarters and everything else that's involved, it becomes a lot more like eye-opening as far as how much space was being utilized by prisoners. We're talking about 4 people, 3 to 4 people to a bunk or to a cell in a 9 by 9 cell, depending on the surface area. That should give you a little guys a little bit more context to how confined these guys and these inmates and all that kind of stuff were and how close they were to these violent offenders. Because like I said, when this place started, it wasn't a correctional facility per se. It wasn't a prison. It was more of a reform school and more of a reformatory program where you were going there to write your life, get out of it, go back to normal life. Some of these guys, when they made the mesh and everything sort of came together and it became a correctional facility, you're talking about a mixed bag of gen pop as well as solitary confinement, where you're not talking about just people that are trying to right the ship. You're talking about people that are either lifers in prison, they've committed violent offenses, and they're now commingling with people that are trying to sort of right that ship and get things back on the right track. So you're gonna have altercations just out of sheer necessity or circumstance. I would say circumstance is probably the better word, because you have people on opposite sides of the coin. So that's obviously going to create conflict between those groups of people. So I
Yeah,
think it's
so
interesting. I think it's interesting from that aspect.
got the numbers. Looks like so it was originally designed for 1 inmate per cell.
Fuck.
In most cases,
Imagine going
4
from
inmates
living by yourself to
to
3
4,
other people
to 3
being
other
on your
people.
ass 24/7, maybe 23/7, depending on how much
So
yard time they got.
so to give everybody a little bit of a visual, cells were only about a 5 foot by 7 foot
So I wasn't even
closet
close.
size.
It's
Nope.
minus about 2 or 3 feet both
Yeah.
ways.
So 5 foot by 7
9
foot,
by 9 would
roughly
have
a
been a
closet
luxury for
size.
those guys. Holy shit.
Yeah. Triple bunking meant 1 bunk stacked above another, 1 inmate sometimes sleeping on the floor. Total
Fuck,
population
dude.
exceeded 2,000. So, there was a
Did you
law
say it was
in 9
concrete and what?
brick.
Hell no. Absolutely not. You think you're not going to have conflict? And imagine the conversation and how that shit went. Who's sleeping on the floor tonight? Fuck you. I'm not sleeping on the floor. That shit, dude. You want to talk about conflict?
Well, then also, like, yeah, like, like,
Like, I got to
it's
go to the
bad en
bathroom. Too bad. I'm on it right now. Like, bro, like, man.
Mhm, mhm. I remember so at the place that I was at on the floor that I was on, like, the most amount of kids we ever had was, like, 20 on that floor for the high risk kids, for the CYS kids. Gen Pop, we had, like, 40 kids on the floor. Now, usually, you would have, like, 2 kids to a room, okay? That's, like, when you're at max capacity. I had guys tell me that worked there way back in the day, way, way back, like, 90s and 2000s. Like, they had, so that floor that I told you about, the first floor, where the max we had was 20 and it was like crazy, they had 78 kids on that floor. They had bunk beds in the hallways.
It's
Yeah,
actually wild.
yeah. So there's like laws and rules against that shit, but like,
How did that not? I mean, not to give too
well,
much away. I don't want you to dox yourself, but how did that get past the state?
so, but again, like they didn't have these laws. Each state's different. They didn't have laws. So now, like, there's laws in place
No,
that
I'm
that
talking
can
about with your
happen.
situation. I'm not talking about back then because things were. Let's both agree that when all of this stuff was going on, it was a completely different time. Like if that shit was
Oh
happening
yeah.
today, it'd be completely different.
Yeah. Well, so it never was like that with me. Everyone had rooms, everything was fine. I'm
Okay,
saying like years prior to
gotcha. Okay, so like
me
during
being
its
there.
inception and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was told by guys that had worked there for 20, 30 plus years when they were like first started working there.
Yeah,
It was crazy. Absolutely crazy. And dude, there was fucking riots that happened. Fucking, cause you got to think like you're usually at like 12, 12 inmates per correctional officer.
yeah. It's as far as ratio is concerned. Sure.
Yeah, so the ratio sucks, and, like, dude, some of those kids are building a brick shit house. Some of
Yeah.
them aren't, but, like, I mean, you got some, and, like, we had our big thing was dealing with, like, for Gen Pop, not the CYS kids, those kids are usually they just have, other problems, but the Gen Pop kids, those are, like, gangs, so we had Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, like, that shit, especially the Philly kids that we were getting. It was yeah, not cool. Glad it never happened when I was there. It's just a lot better now. And I'm gonna be honest with you. This generation of kid now, like they're just not. They're all talk. they're not for the most part. They were
about
just
the
not.
action type shit.
It's not really. They talk and then they'll go to start. There's a handful of kids that don't
Well,
get
of
me
course,
wrong.
there's
They're
always
old
going to
school,
be. There's going to be
but
kids that are about the action, but I
for
would
the
agree.
majority,
For the most part, I would agree with you, especially young kids. They're
they're
trying
very
to put
loud,
on. They're trying to put on for whoever they're trying to put on for.
trying to put on a show. Yeah, so
Yeah, they're trying.
I never.
It's not necessarily that they're acting, but I sort of get where you're coming from with that.
And, like, I heard stories, like, you just be walking, so, like, you gotta anywhere you like, in the morning, you do roll call in the morning, everybody's gotta, you know, get out of bed, they get dressed, and then they come out in the hall, we do a head count, all that stuff. Anywhere you go when you're transitioning, everyone's in line, you gotta do a head count, and you gotta space out the staff between, all the kids and stuff. You got the front of the line, mid line, back of the line, all that shit. Well, like, you several times a day, you'd walk down the line, some kid just punch you in the side of the head.
It'd be something like that, or you're talking about the count. I think you've told me a couple times that like you're doing a count, somebody will just fuck it up, just to fuck it up, just to be an asshole.
And then the rest of the
Like
group,
that type of stuff. Like that's what I'm talking about. Is that like
yeah.
it doesn't prove you're tough. That just proves that
You're just an asshole.
you're just being a dick to be a dick's
You're,
like for being a
yeah,
dick's sake.
yeah,
Like I understand. Like if you come like that's just being an ass.
yeah, but
And you're not
unfortunately,
doing
like,
it for
that's,
any other gain other than to get a rise out of somebody.
yeah, you're just trying to be a fuckhead. I mean,
Yeah,
quite
like but
frankly, like,
like I said, just to sort of get back on sort of what we were talking about with the episode,
I mean, 40
that's
with
sort
Sal's
of
insane.
right, 100%. Florida cell is crazy, no matter how big it is. Four people cohabitating in any size room is ridiculous.
And you gotta think summertime, how hot it is, everything around
You're
those
talking
places
about
is
like early
is
30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, when like all that stuff wasn't a thing.
yeah,
100%.
and, like, the energy, everything, like, the energy, energy, like, positive and negative, that shit
It's gonna
fucking
spider
it
100%.
inspires and people feed off that, and then one person's pissed off in the cell, and the next thing you know, they're telling somebody to go fuck themselves, and then they're pissed off, and a fight happens, somebody gets punched while they're trying to jump in and break it up, like, dude, it's great. No wonder why it went to hell.
But yeah, I mean, we're talking about like I think some numbers to emphasize. I know you were sort of talking about like stuff with where you worked and all of that. But like
Mhm.
over the span of like when all of this stuff started to happen and stuff started to shift towards sort of the like the darker view of what was going on. You're talking about like 200 plus, 300 plus inmate deaths that happened. Talking about staff deaths. We're not talking about inmates dying. We're talking about actual staff members, so doctors versus people that were in like the psych wards and that kind of stuff. And then you're also talking about like people that are in charge of the inmates. So like there's multiple counts, like we said, like the superintendent story that we were talking about before. There's like multiple guard deaths in the history of this place that like people would come back after there was one crazy story I think I heard.
The warden's quarters with the wife and the
It
handgun?
wasn't even the warden's quarters, that one. The crazy one that I heard is that there was like a paroled inmate
Okay.
that was paroled from the prison and when it became a correctional facility after all this stuff happened, came back and wanted revenge against a guard that had like been bad to him, came back or no, it wasn't a guard. He came back to like break somebody out and ended up killing a guard in the process and then ended up getting the electric chair like a year later. Like not only that, and then you had like the murders and the deaths and stuff, and the suicides and stuff like you were talking about. Like I said, there was somebody that I sort of heard in the documentary that I watched where somebody like hung themselves in the cell like the night after they had gotten like psych eval and like were cleared to like it's just all of this weird stuff that happened that you would almost think that like the negative energy like you were talking about it sort of like encompassed this place. Like when
Yeah.
you got to this place you were sort of in like another, I don't want to say
World.
realm, but like you sort of
World.
entered another reality, another world, right?
Yeah, because it's just negative,
It's
heavy
just
ener like,
negative
dude,
energy just encompassing this place. It's like a sort
when
of like a sphere, like a just like a blockade. If you entered this place and were there for however long, it's sort of like encompassed you. That's the really eerie thing. And I think that's why a lot of people get a kick out of it from a paranormal aspect is that it's like this become this beacon from what it once was. It's become this beacon of like negative, paranormal, demonic,
energy were
resentful
bad,
energy
yeah,
that is just sort of encompassed this place when it wasn't really that to begin with, which is that's why I think it's so interesting.
yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when that much negative stuff happens, I think
You think it sort of turned the tide? Like, it sort of became it was a positive thing, and then so much stuff happened so quickly over just such a consistent period of time that it sort of shifted stuff. Like this is one of the craziest things, and I'll sort of let you answer, but I sort of wanted to add this because it's good context. One of the laws of the universe is that energy is neither lost nor destroyed. It just shifts from one party to another. You think that's sort of what happened in this instance? Do you think it just sort of shifted and sort of took its turn from what was really going on?
yeah, I mean, I definitely think it shifted because, not only did the prisoners that they brought in shift, but then you gotta think, like, with that many prisoners, you're probably bringing in guards that are underpaid because they weren't getting funded by the state anymore for reformatory. So, you gotta think staff's got negative mindset, prisoners obviously have negative mindset, living conditions suck. Quite frankly, like, what was there to uplift? It's kinda gone, right?
Well, it was kinda gone, I think, from the inception of what happened with the whole fire aspect. You're bringing in
Yeah.
all of these people that are violent offenders and trying to commingle with people that are trying to straighten their life out. Like, what did you think was gonna happen? There's gonna be conflict just out of pure circumstance.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's what's really crazy about this is they thought that putting violent offenders with people that were trying to right their ship was a great idea. That's the crazy thing I think about this place, and is that it was in my personal view, not necessarily avoidable because they had to put them somewhere, but like, how do you feel about that? Sort of, what's your view on like sort of what the decision making was and that kind of thing?
As far as to make it
Yeah,
a,
like what made them think that putting violent offenders with people that are trying to just, get their life back on track, what made that a good decision? Where do you stand on that one?
I mean, it was a horrible decision. I think, unfortunately, what happened was there was a catastrophic event. They had to put these prisoners someplace, so they kinda probably just thought, "You know what? We're gonna throw them in here for now, and, we'll try to get them out of there as soon as we can," and then eventually it was like, "Well, they're there, so we're just gonna keep it going." I mean, did they think it through? No.
Do you think
Can
it
they
was
think it through?
so
I mean,
I'll give you a wild scenario. Do you think it was a panic thing?
yeah.
Like COVID-19, for example? Do you think it was a panic measure? Do you think like so the reason I say that is because like panic measures, so they've had to put all these people somewhere. So they had literally no way out of the situation, right? And you can play devil's advocate with the exact same thing with COVID-19 with the lockdowns. Do you think that was just an emergency response and something that they had to do given the situation?
For COVID?
I'm saying in tandem. Do
In
you think
tandem? I
that the
mean, yeah, it's
emergency
probably
response was justified because they had to do something? They couldn't just do nothing.
probably because I mean, like, you gotta think how you can't just quick up and move prisoners. Like, everything's gotta be documented, you gotta get permission, you gotta, like, go through the state. So, like, I know people are probably listening going, "Oh, well, they coulda just transported those prisoners to, Kentucky or Michigan or wherever." Like, yeah, they could've. Like, they didn't send all of those prisoners to the reformatory. I wanna make that clear. Like, it's not like they just transported one prison to the other. So they did move prisoners to multiple facilities, but the problem is I think that instead of them I think they saw an opportunity because you gotta remember when a prisoner, I don't care if it's youth or, an adult prisoner, goes to a facility, like, they get money from the state because 'cause they're taking that kid on as a case. Each person is a case, so they get money from the state. So the more intake you have, the more money you're getting. I think they saw a cash cow long term after the fact, but at the beginning, it's too hard and there's too many steps to the process to send them to Georgia or, Kentucky or West Virginia, another state. So, they probably had to keep them in state, I would think. I don't know. Again, this is just me guessing, and because I've kind of worked in that system, I know a little bit of knowledge about it and how it works. That's my best guess. I would say what you were saying, they probably knee jerk reaction. Holy shit, we got to get them somewhere. We'll just put them here. We can't let them go, obviously, and we don't want them, the more time that goes by, the more antsy those prisoners are going to get. They could riot, they could whatever. So it was probably just a quick, hastily decision. And then long term, they probably saw the money, because that's the only reason you would fucking take and have over 2,000 prisoners, four to a fucking closet cell,
Like I say, did you
40
say it was 5 by
cell.
7 or 7 by 5 or whatever it
It was
was?
5 by 7, 4 people in there.
You're
It
talking
doesn't
about
make
somebody well, if you're talking about 5 by 7, we're talking about width versus length. You had 2 feet of space if you were laying on the floor.
you're not fitting, bud. I don't know what they would have done with you.
I don't know,
Just for
man, but,
reference
like, just for
just for
re
reference, our co-host here, Blake, is over 7 foot, so he would
and I
kinda
ain't
be
working.
SOL.
What do you want me to do? I guess fetal
You'd be
position, I
the
don't know.
you'd be the guy on the floor, that's for sure. The fucking bunk beds aren't gonna fit your big ass.
But, like, that's the like, 4 people to a 5 by 7 is insane.
But yeah, so, like, back to what I was saying, you're only doing that if you're getting money for it. There's no other reason to
Or so
fucking
well,
do it.
not necessarily getting money, but saving.
Well, no, so you get money. So, like, the prisons and stuff, they get money from the state to take care of those prisoners.
Well, yeah, I
And
understand that, but also what I'm saying is they're saving money too by not having to build more cells, not have more, like, all that
yeah,
kinda
no,
stuff.
yeah,
That's sorta where
yeah,
I'm coming from. I 100% agree
yeah,
with you that
yeah.
they're getting
Instead
money
of
per capita to have those people in there. I 100% get that. But
yeah, so
on the same side, they're saving money by not having to have more surface area to build
yeah,
more
they didn't do
cells or have more area for them to interact with each other, that kinda shit. That's sorta what I'm talking.
yeah, they didn't do any, expanding,
That's what
I
I'm
don't
saying
think.
is that there's no,
Yeah.
like, renovation, there's no expanding, there's no nothing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find I'm sure we could find it somewhere, it's gotta be public knowledge, if we could find the, financials of, like, their budget,
Like
their,
the
like,
before and
year-to-year
after, that kinda
budget.
stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna look that up
Yeah,
real
that would
quick,
be
actually.
interesting. So,
I'm gonna
I
take a look.
yeah, take a look at that. So, sort of transitioning from what we were talking about with all of this bad stuff going on, living conditions, the obvious violence and murders and suicides and staff deaths and all of that kind of stuff. The crazy numbers as far as inmate deaths over the span of when this stuff started to go bad and all that kind of stuff. We sort of segue into some of the real deal, like tragedy and real people that were sort of affected this place and sort of affected the way it's looked on now. And I think the one that you sort of were talking about before was with the Arthur Glackey and the Helen Glackey incident with like the accidental shooting of Helen and all that kind of stuff. I think that the timeline of all of this was really interesting. This is probably the most notable stuff that happened at the prison. To give you a little context, Arthur Glackey, I think, was he was the warden of the Ohio Reformatory for about 10 or 15 years. I can't remember exactly, but I know it was in that time frame roughly. And essentially, there was an instance where his wife Helen was, I think they were getting ready for some type of event or something, and she went to go get a jewelry box. This is like the account of sort of what happened. She was getting a jewelry box or something out of the closet in the private apartment that was in the administrative wing where her and Arthur lived. She was getting something like a jewelry box or something like that out of a closet, and there happened to be a loaded handgun within that closet that was near or next to whatever she was trying to grab out of the closet. Essentially, long story short, the gun fell down. It discharged around and it hit her, I think it was in her left lung, from what I remember. And essentially, she was shot. It obviously incapacitated her to a point where they had to rush her to a hospital, and she never regained consciousness from what I understand, or what we understand from the research that we did. And essentially, that's what killed her. Foreshadowing about 10 to 15 years later, Arthur Glackey has a massive, 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 massive heart attack and dies. So, like, that's one of the probably prime examples of everything happening. It's sort of a catalyst for sort of what's been going on at the prison and what it's sort of known for, and like an accidental death that ended in something absolutely 100%, nobody can argue, really tragic ending.
It just adds fuel to the whole
Yeah,
negative
like it sort of
events.
it feeds the narrative that this place is bad. It has a bad omen. It's bad energy. It's all encompassing with negative energy, all that kind of stuff. So with the tragedy stuff and the real people thing, I think for me, it adds like a humanistic aspect, right? It's not just paranormal. It's something that happened to somebody real and it's reality and that kind of stuff. And it happened within the walls of this place that has a lot of negative energy. So it's sort of, I guess, in a way, validates the place as like a bad omen or like bad energy or that kind of thing.
So what's your take? Do you like to kind of throw the question back at you? Do you think it was just a hastily made decision and they didn't think about it, like, the whole COVID lockdown thing, or do you think, they did the bet? Like, where do you stand on it?
I think it's I think it's tough to make a rational decision or invoke a rational response when you're put in stress. I think it's really tough. I think only a handful of people on this planet, and I'm saying handful, we got like 6, 7, 8 billion people on this planet, give or take. It's a really tough go to try to go into a really stressful situation and make a rational decision. I think anybody would agree with the fact that we all make emotional decisions in the moment that don't necessarily make sense, but they make sense at the time because you're not thinking clearly.
Yeah, 100%.
I think there's a lot of external factors that influence that decision, and I don't think you can be held. It comes with the whole insanity plea and all that kind of stuff with like court cases and all that kind of stuff. I mean, some things are not necessarily out of the person's control, but there's an extenuating circumstance that made them do it. I'm not saying that for all cases. I'm not justifying anything that anybody does because of insanity, but there is an external factor that can make that an interesting dynamic, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know how you sort of feel about that. I think it's definitely an influencing factor, having somebody that's dealt with mental illness as well as you have without giving too much away. We've come out the other side. It's not undoable. It's not impossible. But I think it is a valid conversation to say that it is a factor. I think that's probably where I'm going with that. How do you feel about it?
I think also for context, we got to remember where we were at in the world back in what this was 1930 that
I
happened,
think it was
that
like
fire.
30s or, yeah, late 30s, maybe early 40s or late 20s. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, like, 1930s, let's think about where the world was. Communication, like, they couldn't just pick up a cell phone and call,
Right.
right? So there's a huge fire that happens. They have, I think they had rotary phones by then, right? Maybe, or was it before then?
Maybe.
So, all right, let's have 2 scenarios. One, they don't, and they gotta do the messages by letter. Somebody from that prison that was on fire, they probably they had to either by horseback or early on with cars
I would say even,
drive.
I mean, maybe the most common communication at that time, I might be trolling with this, but maybe like Morse, something like that.
But either way, what I'm saying is, like,
Either way,
not
it wasn't
instant.
it wasn't as expedited as it is now, 100%.
Yeah. So, like, they're only working with so much. Now that, like, I sit back and think about it, like, what would you do? That's like, that really is, like, a horrible situation to have
Yeah, I
because
mean,
it's not
you're talking about the communication, you're talking about something that happened very suddenly, well, quote unquote suddenly,
right.
where and you also have to deal with the factors of like how many people died. You said there was like 300 plus deaths of people that died in the fire. I think it was like
300.
311 or 300 and some change, something like that. You're dealing with all of these catastrophic instances at one time. And like you said, at the time, you're talking about very, very, and we're talking about today's standards, you're talking about almost obsolete communication. I don't know anybody that communicates by letter anymore unless they're sort of on, the
In
sort of
person,
like you know what I mean? Like, I mean, to keep it a buck, who really writes a letter anymore? It's an email, if anything.
prisoners,
You know what I
they're
mean?
still
Though,
writing
like
letters.
that's my point. Is that like,
Yeah.
and it became like even today, vast majority, if you get a phone call as a prisoner, that's a plus. Most of the
Mhm.
time, you're writing letters or sending postage. Still,
Mhm.
from what I understand.
Well, so you're allowed to get your phone calls, at least like where I was at, the placement school that I was at, they were required to get 2 phone calls a week. And it's not like they can just pick up the phone and call whoever. They have their counselor and they use the counselor's phone. The counselor has to dial the number. You are given as a counselor their file, and in their file, it tells you who is approved on their call list. And if they're not on that call list, they can't talk to them. They're not even allowed to talk. Like, if, let's say, there's a dispute with a brother or a sister, say some sibling, and it says in their file, do not let them communicate with their sibling. If I call mom and I gotta call, I gotta say, "Hi, this is Dan O'Neill from so and so. Johnny would like to talk to you." I gotta confirm that it's them, hand the phone to him, it's on speaker, and then if I hear Johnny talking to sibling or whoever isn't approved, I gotta end the phone call immediately. That's how that works.
Makes sense.
Now, I don't know about adult prison and how that works. Occasionally, it's up to their supervisor, their district supervisor, of whether they can do FaceTime calls. You might get a FaceTime call once a month for good behavior, but everything's documented. I would have to document each conversation that the kid had, who they talked to, what they talked about, the time, all that. I do that for every single kid that was on my caseload. And you have everywhere from like, 5 or 6 kids all the way up to like 12, 14. It just depends, it fluctuates. But I mean, yeah, everything's documented. It's pretty crazy. I do have those numbers, by the way. As far as what we were talking about, as far as like why the hell would they take it's like I understand the rash decision like we just talked about early on, but then later like why they keep increasing the numbers. And here is what we were able to dig up. So there isn't like a clean and widely published year-to-year budget record for the Ohio State Reformatory because they don't have what modern prisons have, obviously. So most of what we're getting here is from the state reports and court documents, especially the 1970s lawsuit because of the crowdedness. So basically, when it was a reformatory, okay, late $1,800, they got between $300 to $600 per inmate per year. Okay, so that funding covered schooling, skilled labor programs, structured reform system. More money per prisoner basically meant better conditions and intent to rehabilitate. Okay, after the fire, there was reconstruction, maintenance costs rose. So that was a big reason why they didn't send them back. They fixed it, but they didn't. I don't think they were able to fix as much as they wanted to of the original facility in Columbus. So they had a budget strain increased, and then they shifted from reform to containment and regular prison. So essentially, the overcrowding happened because this is crazy. Guess how much, and this is 1970s dollars, by the way, okay? Guess how much they were getting per inmate per year. And think like 70s, okay? What do you think
Per year, you said?
per inmate per year? Only before the fire and all that, it was between $300 to $600 per inmate per year. And again, that's like 1800s numbers. So those numbers are like, that was a lot of money back then.
I'd say it's triple or quadruple.
Pretty close. $1,000 to $2,000.
I was gonna say about 1,000. That's actually what I was thinking before you said anything. I was sort of thinking to myself.
So pretty crazy. Like they're getting significant amount of money.
So you're talking about 2,000, 1,000. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's why that's why you have the overcrowding is because of money. That's literally the only reason you would do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got to think we'll go high numbers, okay? 2,000 inmates, $2,000 per inmate. That's $4 million back then. So $4 million in
a bit of change.
That's quite a bit of change. I can do that calculation in a second. What is the?
So you're doing like what it would be today?
Yeah.
Yeah. What would $4 million or $2 million or whatever it be today?
Yep. The 1970s today. By the way, we're using ChatGPT, so we'll see what ChatGPT comes out with. So due to the inflation, it's thinking, it's working. Hold on. What do you think it's going to be the equivalent to? Let me ask you that. What do you think?
You said it was 2 million from 2 million back then?
2 million per prisoner. I'm sorry, they're $2,000 per prisoner. There were over 2,000 prisoners, so it comes out to like a little over $4 million.
So 4 million.
What do you think that would be equivalent to today's?
I would say double or triple, so I would say we're probably looking at about 12 million.
Roughly 18 to 34 million.
So I wasn't even close. It's actually probably somewhere in the middle of that. So we're talking about what, 25, 26 million today?
Yeah. So between
more or less.
Like, isn't that crazy? No wonder why they were keeping those prisoners.
Yeah.
They were getting that money.
Yeah, it was a
And they weren't
bottom line
and
decision probably for sure.
they were putting the bare minimum back into the prisoners. That money wasn't being used for them, most of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Hell no.
They were doing
That
the
was
bare
going
minimum,
into,
trying to just get
yeah,
by more than likely because they had
yeah,
so much to worry about, so they were probably trying to pinch pennies, trying to make yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and then you gotta think, like, they probably had a decent, like, pension for the workers because why else would you work there and take that job?
Yeah, with all the stuff that was going on.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
probably had to pay, like, a decent amount just in case, like, workers' comp or whatever, if they even had that back then.
Yeah, that's a fair argument for sure too, for sure.
So, anyway, that's that. So, can kinda understand why things got to the way they were, just with the greed and the money, not even just the negativity and all the other crazy shit that, leads to why this place is so haunted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good segue too, is sort of mentioning the hauntings and the fact that it was just sort of an epicenter for negative energy. I think the haunting thing is why people get such a Jones out of being there now. I mean, they do tours. It's become a tourist attraction at this point. It's become sort of this allure and sort of illusory type of establishment that's not even sort of reputable for what it was made to do in the first place. It's become more of a tourist attraction, become a ghost hunting epicenter. They run tours, from what I understand, at this place. Like you said, it became a movie location for probably one of, if not the most famous Stephen King novel or adaptation of a Stephen King novel that there's been with respect to like Green Mile and probably like Misery and maybe what am I thinking of? The Shining as well.
Shining is a good one. I mean, here's what's crazy. Facility, okay, the Ohio State Reformatory was operational. It shut down in 1990. So the year I was born, it was still running for a little bit. That movie was filmed in like I want to say 93 or 94. So it was only vacant for a couple of years when they actually started like filming that movie. So, you know,
So
now
94, just
when
in case you were curious,
oh,
94.
okay, so 94, I
No,
wasn't
you
too
weren't far
far
off
off.
at
That's
all. You
only
weren't far off at all.
yeah, that's only a couple years after it was shut down. But now, if you go there or you look at pictures online, I suggest anybody that's into this stuff, go take a look at the pictures. It looks dilapidated. The paint is peeling off. It looks like it's deteriorating. It kind of looks like what you would think of for a extremely haunted prison and a place of horror. So the building itself kind of looks like it's got, scabs and dead skin and stuff. So, you can actually, people say that they can hear screams, voices, even snoring can be heard in the abandoned cell blocks. And interestingly enough, hauntings were first reported there even back when it was still functioning. It's inmates said that they would report seeing a woman who would visit the cell blocks and tuck in their blankets at night. Of course, no such woman existed, though it may be the spirit of a nurse murdered at the prison years earlier. And again, that's from usghostadventures.com.
Well, that was also the thing
It's
with like the Glacky whole scenario too, is that like when people would take tours of this place or have taken tours of this place, they'll talk about like a woman that like if you approach them or approach it, it'll just her it will sort of disappear, and it's sort of like the all encompassing like apparition of her still being in like the warden's quarters. That's essentially where it takes place, is in like the warden's quarters, with all of the stuff that we talked about earlier with her being accidentally killed by the discharged round from the gun that fell and all that kind of stuff. So like there's been like claims of like shadow figures, voices, like you said, cold spots, objects moving, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of paranormal activity that happens within this place that people have seen all over the place. It's not just one centralized area, it's pretty much everywhere.
yeah, and especially down in the where
Like the solitary
uh
confinement and all that kind of
the
stuff
yes,
was.
yeah,
Yeah, like
down in
I
the
was gonna say
solitary.
the three
That's
hot
a
spots that I sort of saw that were probably the most prominent were like the chapel. So like where like they had all of like the mass for like religious purposes and that kind of stuff. Solitary confinement, like you said, the hole, which again, like I said, you guys think that like just the Gen Pop stuff was bad as far as like prisoners to a cell, solitary confinement. I think they said that like they packed like 150 to 200 people in the same room as far as solitary confinement, and that like led to a lot of murders and fights and that kind of stuff. And then you also had like the warden's quarters, like we were talking about with the Helen Glackey and the Arthur Glackey stuff. So
Yeah. So this is interesting too. A paranormal investigator, like this prison, just to give everyone like a vision here of how crazy this place is. This is on like a list of I think like top 10 most haunted places in the country or world or something like that. Like it is extremely haunted. Paranormal investigator Greg, I'm going to mess this up, but that's okay. Greg Feketik had never seen a ghost until he came to the Ohio State Reformatory. So he didn't believe in them, thought it was bullcrap. According to him, he saw a shadow figure walking up a flight of stairs while touring the reformatory. His quote is, "As I'm contemplating what I saw, I heard growling coming from the other room." Fedek recalled, "I'm like, that wasn't good," but shortly after that, he heard church bells. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
as far as the hotspots and stuff, I think it's also not just one thing, but like there's been, like you said, there's numerous paranormal investigators that have had accounts of things going on. It's over a multitude of years. It's not just something that happened through happenstance or like a couple instances. Like you said, this is probably, I would actually venture a guess that it's probably, like you said, top 10, top 10, top 20 most haunted places, at least in the country. I think that's probably not even a stretch as
Yeah.
far as like a place that has just all encompassing paranormal activity. It's not just like it's not a farm where like the barn is haunted. It's the entire complex.
Yeah. Yeah, it's even like the graveyard. So there's over 200 inmates died in the Ohio State Reformatory, mostly during its infamous years of overcrowding. So due to the nature of many of these men's crimes, their families never came to claim their bodies. So they created the graveyard on the prison grounds, and each one was given a headstone, but instead of their name, they only had their prisoner number etched into the stone. So that dehumanized them, which I'm sure left some spirits very upset and restless. There's been a ton of reports of shadow figures wandering the graveyard, clinging to their final resting place. So that's sad. I mean, to not even put their name, that's really.
I went through a life of, well, depending on the person, they went through a life of absolute torment and trash and that kind of thing. And then they're dehumanized even in the afterlife by only putting their number on a headstone. That's, yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to, anybody is interested in, going and doing a tour there, you can absolutely do that. They even do where you can do lockdowns where you can stay overnight. I'm out on that, I think. I don't think I would do that.
Yeah, the overnight one, I mean,
I
I'm
don't know.
squeamish when it comes to ghost hunting in the first place. I don't like, as I've said in other episodes, I don't fuck with shit that doesn't need to be fucked with.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to, and it's
Overnight
not.
thing would be a little bit boastful from that perspective. I don't think I mean, the ghost hunting is one thing if you're going to do it during the day and just tour the facility. But if you're there to like, I don't know, I guess egg it on, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do it for research purposes and stuff, and like I get that. The problem is even touring it during the day, people still get messed with during the day.
Right.
Secondly, that shit clings to you.
Yeah,
Like, it
100%.
follows people to their homes and their families and stuff, and, like, a lot of those paranormal research people, it fucks with their life in a not good way. People's marriages end, like, their health goes bad, people end up, dying, like, literally, like, it's not that's happened quite a few cases with paranormal researchers. Something that's really crazy is the original electric chair, which was nicknamed Old Sparky while in service. It's still there, and a lot of people, they'll actually, when they're doing their investigations, they'll sit in it and they'll ask the prisoners questions,
That's
which
actually insane.
you can probably go ahead and assume that they get some not great responses
Yeah.
when they do that. Um, yeah, they got over 120,000 visitors each year, so it's, they do a lot of stuff there. They actually have a paranormal institute there. I didn't know that. Did you know that? They actually have where you can go and learn how to become a paranormal investigator. That's kind of cool.
Well, it's not a bad environment to learn how that stuff works. That's for sure.
No, it's a 4-hour investigation too when you get done with the class.
Interesting. So that's sort of like
So
it's like your test at the end of the road type deal.
pretty much, yeah, kind of like put everything that you learned into real use and stuff like that. I mean, some of the stuff, some of the, I don't know if any of our listeners watch it, but Expedition X on Discovery Plus, I love that show. I also watch Expedition Unknown, a little different. That's more like adventure and like trying to find treasure in lost cities and stuff like that in the Amazon. Whereas Expedition X is more kind of like what our show is like, cryptids, haunted stuff, and all that. The tools that they have, and ironically, you know what's crazy, Blake? Did you know one of the biggest paranormal investigative equipment, guess what it is, what it stems from that they use now?
I'd have to say it's probably like EMP or something like that.
Well, so I'll give you a hint. It comes from an accessory to a video game system.
Accessory to a video game system.
And they don't make it anymore, but they used to. Like, they found out that this accessory was actually showing paranormal spirits. So now they use it so you can actually see spirits, like legit. It picks them up.
Probably some like an Xbox. The craziest thing I can think about is like an Xbox Connect camera or something.
Yes, that's it. The Xbox Connect cameras can actually pick up spirits.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's like the only thing I would think of. It's crazy that I got that though. The only thing I can think of is like like some kind of. That's why I sort of went to the camera, because it would have to be something visual.
Yeah, because so that's like one of the bigger discoveries in the last like decade, I want to say. Probably more than a decade.
That's kind of
now,
crazy that I got that on the first try though.
That is crazy. You got that.
But as much as this place has been like, it should be respected and that kind of thing, I think we should talk about the pop culture aspect and sort of like the modern day and sort of round that out as we sort of get towards the end of the episode and sort of what we're talking about. So like we said, it was the filming location for Shawshank Redemption. Very, very powerful, very, very popular movie. If you haven't seen it, it's Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman at their absolute peak. It's a very good movie. It's an adaptation of a short story or a short novel by Stephen King. So if you have not either seen the movie or read the novel, highly recommend it. I think, Dan, you've seen it as well, correct?
Shawshank, yeah. Yep.
Well,
great movie.
I mean, now this place is sort of seen as a novelty. It's sort of seen as like a museum. There, like I said, we give they give tours of complex in general. Like we said earlier, there's also like paranormal tours that take place as well. There's ghost hunts, all that kind of stuff sort of takes place on a regular basis. So it sort of went from a nightmare and like a black mark on the history of at least Ohio, if not the country, if not the world.
Definitely say the prison system and how it's
100%
handled.
It's definitely a black mark in that industry for sure. It became a tourist attraction and something that's sort of a novelty at this point. So I guess the ethical question to ask, Dan, from your perspective, and I'll sort of give mine as well. Should a place like this be used for entertainment? Should it be respected, or do you sort of toe that line? And so where do you sort of stand? Should it be one or the other? Or should it be sort of married with the two?
It is a part of history, so I think, the restoration is good. I will be honest with you, as far as the heavy metal concerts and stuff like that, I don't agree with that at all. I can see why people would think that's cool. I think that's highly disrespectful. I don't think anything good comes from that other than PR and marketing people making a lot of money. I just think it's disrespectful to the spirits. People doing research is one thing, trying to, I think if you're trying to go there and help these spirits find peace so they can move on, that's a good thing. Trying to agitate them and push them, like, just let them be. But again, like, to each his own. What do you think?
I think the celebration of the place is good in two different contexts. So it's opposite sides of the same coin. I think the celebration of the boastful celebration of it being haunted and like so much bad happened there is probably the wrong way to go. I think that's probably the wrong way to tackle things. I think as a history buff and somebody that likes history and likes paranormal activity and understanding why things happened and why things are still happening the way they are and that kind of thing, I think that is beneficial because it allows us to understand and sort of come to terms with a bad part of Ohio history as well as a bad part of just U.S. history. I mean, like, this thing has become to the point where it's a black mark. and it wasn't sought out. It wasn't initially sought after as that in the first place. It was something that was supposed to be a positive thing. I think the way it sort of turned from one instance being that fire that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, I think that's interesting. I think the history of the place is important, but I don't think it should be celebrated from the standpoint that it's like a boastful celebration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's kinda like
I think it should be celebrated for a piece of history and exactly what it has become and what it was and that kind of thing. But I don't think it should be used as a fun house, if that makes sense.
I agree with that.
I think we should respect what happened there and what's going on with it now, but we shouldn't celebrate it from the standpoint of it being selfish. I think we need to respect what it is and what it was and what it tried to be and what it is now, but we don't need to celebrate the fact that it's evil for the sake of being evil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that.
But like I said, this thing sort of went from one extreme to the other. It's not necessarily something that was it's not something that we should be proud of, I guess is my point. The way it turned out. The way it started out seemed to be very beneficial, and like you said, we sort of alluded to some of the statistics at the beginning of the episode of why it was successful and how successful it was at its inception. I think you can boil it down, and this might be sort of a weird view on it, but shit sort of happens.
Mhm.
We're not always necessarily in control of what happens. I think we sort of touched on the fact that it was an emergency response, what initially happened, that sort of made, I would say, the cosmic turn to what it turned into versus what it was. It was a panic decision, and we sort of have to live with that fact and sort of celebrate it for what it is to a certain degree, but we don't celebrate it for the wrong reasons. It's a piece of history, and we can't turn away from the fact that it's history and we should learn from it, but we shouldn't celebrate it in the wrong context, I think is sort of where I stand. How about you?
It's a good case study, right? For, like, anyone in, like, taking, like, a criminal, uh, major in college or something like that, like, hey, like, it's a good historical look back at, like, what can we learn from this so this doesn't happen? Why don't we do X anymore? You know, I think that's you can definitely use it as a learning experience, but yeah, no, I mean, like I said before, like, you wanna do ghost tours or whatever, that's fine, but, like, be respectful. I don't think they should be doing I mean, dude, I was looking through, like, all the entertainment stuff they do, like, several artists have shot music videos there. WWE did a promo there for, The Undertaker. Like, they do a lot of entertainment stuff there, so it's still bringing in money all these years later.
Yeah, from an 1886, it's still making money and still pulling revenue.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy stuff. But, I mean, it's very interesting. I'm glad we did this because it definitely is one of the most haunted places in the world, and it's right in our backyard. So that is cool and interesting.
Yeah,
So
I think the most interesting thing, like I said, is sort of what it was built for, and it was built to sort of reform and get people back on the right track and that kind of thing. And then, in true ironic fashion, it's sort of turned into something that broke people and sort of destroyed what it once was, and sort of the ivory towers turn into sort of like the black towers or like dark towers, that kind of thing. So
mhm.
it's an interesting contrast from what it could have been to what it turned out to be, and it's dark, it's gothic, it's unfortunate, but like I said, we all have stuff in our lives, and all the good and bad comes with everything, but bad isn't always bad. You can always learn from something, and even if something is good, it's not always just 100% silver and gold. It's you can still learn from something good even if it feels a little bit better than the bad. I think a lot of the reason that it still has this allure and still the illusory that sort of evades people is that there's a lot of unanswered questions about the documented history, because again, we're talking about 1886 when this thing was constructed and finally finished, and then we're also talking about probably like a 10 to 20 year period where it was still sort of forming itself and that kind of thing, and then you have the latter part of everything where it really turned bad and got really gruesome and dark
Well,
and ominous.
yeah, and they didn't keep records like they do today. Like, they just
100%, and
didn't
that's sort of my point.
there's laws and regulations because of what happened at Mansfield of why you have to keep those documented, you know, numbers and everything like that. So, again, like, some good came out of it, but, it's yeah, I think it can be used as a good lesson. Started off good, went down a different road because of one instance. One incident derailed the whole thing. That's, like, how fast life can change. things can change in situations. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just it makes you think about, like, it might be getting a little cosmic for a couple of people on the that are listening, but, like, it's sort of it brings back the butterfly effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anybody that has any instance of the butterfly effect, if you're not familiar with what it is, it's a pretty common, phenomenon that happens. It's kind of like the Mandela effect, which we've alluded to a couple episodes. I think we did one on the Mandela effect for sure.
We've talked about
We
it.
we've
We've
talked
talked
about
about
it
it.
in
Yeah.
depth for sure. And it's one of those things where it's crazy how the smallest little detail can change your entire outlook or the entire outlook of what happens to you while you're
If
going
that
through life, or
fire
even an instance that fire doesn't happen, maybe this doesn't happen.
Dude, if that fire
It's
doesn't
crazy.
happen, this might have been one of the most positive success stories for rehabilitation
At least for that
ever.
time period, if not,
Right.
yeah, for sure.
It could be a hell of a success story instead of, like, a roller coaster where it goes up and then just fucking crashes, so
Yeah, absolutely plummets for sure. But like I said, it's one of those things where it started off great. Everything was roses, and then all of a sudden, because of one instance, like you said, it just absolutely nosedives and just plummets into the ground, and even further so. Well, like I said at the beginning of the episode, a lot of the stuff that we talk about is one of those things where or some of those things where, like, something can drastically change based. I know we did the JFK episode. We've done a couple episodes on conspiracy theories and, like, sort of like the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff, and it all sort of spiders to the same thing. I think that we've talked about in this episode too, is that, like, one instance, one bad decision, all that kind of stuff sort of snowballs into something that wasn't necessarily what it was set out to be, but it becomes that because of a couple things going wrong or a couple things going right.
well, there's that famous quote, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." Yeah. It's you can have great intentions, but at some point, greed, power, money, all that kinda
It
is
deters. It
overpowering.
deters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it can take a beautiful person, just like a drug can. Because I think greed and power and money is a drug, just like, any drug can turn a beautiful person into somebody who lies and manipulates and cheats and does all sorts of horrible stuff. Well, so can money, power, and greed, and I definitely think they got a little greedy with this one, and unfortunately, a lot of bad things happened, a lot of people died.
A
A
lot
lot
of
of
people
people died.
lost their ass too, I'm sure. Not just the physical torment that people had to endure, but, like, imagine being a guard, or imagine being a warden or something and have to oversee something that's just catastrophic and just plummeting right before you. Like,
Mhm.
it's just things are going from bad to worse to absolutely catastrophic, and you have no it just feels like you're up against it. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing you can do to change it. One bad decision or one rush decision or one emergency decision turned this place into an absolute just eyesore for not only Ohio, but the country and maybe even the world, considering, depending on where it is on the paranormal activity scale, as far as popularity and, like, notoriety, as far as where this scales on that list. The people that started this place couldn't have thought in their wildest dreams that anything like this would happen or would have the reputation that it does today. There's no way.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
So, but I think it was a good episode, dude. Like I said, it was one of our episodes that we sort of delved into a lot of different aspects. We sort of went through the haunting thing, sort of where it was as at its inception, what it was set out to do, and then sort of how it took a turn for the worse. And it's not necessarily a fun topic to talk about, but it is, like you said, a cautionary tale. I think that's what people can probably, if you guys listen to the episode or do any research on your own or sort of take it to heart what we sort of talked about, it's a cautionary tale, I think, at the end of the day. It's
Yeah.
one of those
Yeah, and
things
it is
where, like, it
interesting.
could have went the complete other direction, and unfortunately, some things in life and some things in this world just don't go the way you planned, and things happen, and you sort of have to deal with the fact that you have to respect the fact that it happened, but you don't, like I said, necessarily celebrate the fact that it was bad, and you're celebrating that fact for monetary value or anything like that. You respect the fact that it happened. It's a piece of history, and we move on.
Yep, for sure.
But as always, like I said, this is our first episode in a while. We're going to try to get back as much as we can, trying to get back on regular postings on both Instagram and Twitter for you guys, or rather X, for clips of the show, as well as trying to do an episode a little bit more on a regular basis, just as we sort of come back into the fold of trying to get you guys more episodes and trying to get the show back on track from where we were. Because, like I said, I think, Dan, you said we're in what, like 12 or 13 countries now or something like that?
We're in
So
19.
19, so I was even way off. But even, we did a little bit of a talk or a little bit of a conversation, I think yesterday or the day before, where we were talking about the fact that it's skyrocketed, and the fact that we're sort of global now in the grand scheme of things, where before we had like 4 or 5 countries where we were sort of being listened to. So it's sort of all over the place. And at this point, I think that's a good thing. Before I plug the socials and all that kind of stuff, before we end the episode, you got any final thoughts about sort of where we're at in the show, or sort of how the episode went? What are you thinking?
I thought the episode went great. It wasn't a fun topic, but it was interesting, and I I enjoyed getting your perspective and learning more with you. As far as everyone that's listening, we appreciate all of you a lot. For I mean, we started this off just for fun, and it's still fun, and we enjoy what we're doing. We apologize for the break. Just we got some life stuff going on, but we're gonna be back on here more consistent. And if there's any topic or anything that you guys think would be interesting that you want to hear us do an episode on, please send us a comment on the episode, or our social pages that Blake will share here. We'll send out some highlight reels too of the episodes, and we really appreciate you a lot. So thank you, wherever you're at.
Yeah, so like Dan said, we'll plug the socials. So if you guys heard at the very beginning, we're live on both Spotify as well as Apple Music. I think the Apple Music has sort of been our biggest contributor toward the listening and that kind of stuff, as far as engagement and things like that. But like I said, we're available on both platforms. So make sure you guys follow the Spotify, as well as subscribe or follow the Apple Music as well. Like I said, we're live on Instagram as well as X.com. So if you guys follow at ObscuraCast, just the name of the actual podcast, you guys will be able to find us on the socials. Like I said, we're going to get back on posting stuff to Instagram, as well as retweeting and getting some sort of stuff out on X.com about the episode, to make sure you guys are up to date with what's going on and sort of the content and that kind of stuff, getting snippets. And maybe if you don't listen to the whole episode, you'll get a piece, and maybe transition to listen to more full episodes, and sort of get us some more engagement, some more viewership, some more listening engagement, and that kind of thing. So without any further ado, I appreciate you guys. Just like Dan said, make sure to follow us on all the socials. Make sure to listen on Spotify and Apple Music, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Appreciate you guys, and we will talk to you guys soon.
See ya.